I'm going to tell you this story about the time I was almost murdered while looking for the Appalachian Footpath box. So it was April 4th, and we're in northern Vermont. We had just had a bunch of warm weather, and all of the snow had melted. Well, the bulk of it, anyways. It was definitely time to go look for treasure. And around 10 p.m. on April 4th, I called my sister because I was convinced I cracked it. I figured out where it is. And I convinced her by 10:30 that we needed to pack up all my camping gear in my minivan and head down to Little Rock Pond in southern Vermont. It's about a 2-hour, 15-minute drive from my house. So we did that. We got tons of blankets and pillows because it's still super cold in Vermont in April. And we arrived at Mount Tabor around 1:20 a.m. And we found out that the road up to the Little Rock Pond trailhead is closed. I didn't know that before I went. So we had to park before the 2 point whatever mile road that goes up to the trailhead. And it's right before this bridge called Silver Bridge. And we arrived there and we noticed there's another car there. It was a white, sporty looking, newer car with out-of-state plates. And they had backed into a parking space right before the bridge. And we did the same. We assumed that they were also treasure hunters and they were up there looking for it. We put on our headlamps, we had our snacks and our sandwiches and our water bottles and our bear spray. We started heading up the road to get to the trailhead. And on our way up, we all of a sudden got hit with this terrible, ominous gut feeling that we needed to turn around immediately. And the second it hit me, my sister looked at me and she goes, "I don't feel good about this. Something's off. We need to turn around." And we tried to convince ourselves we were being crazy. And we walked for another 3 minutes before we were like, no, 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 no. Something feels really wrong. We just can't put our finger on what it is. And we turned around, we walked back to my van. We were probably only I don't know, not even a half a mile up the road when we made this decision. So we hike back. We go in my van, and the car that was there when we first arrived is still there. So about one car space between us. I didn't park right next to them. I left a little room. We had a discussion should we look in that car and see if somebody's in there? And we're like, no, that would be so rude. At this point, it's 2:30 in the morning. And who does that? Can you imagine peeking in somebody's car while they're in there sleeping? That would be so creepy. So we made the decision not to do that. And we set an alarm for 5 a.m. because we figured that there would be hundreds of people heading to that trailhead first thing in the morning because cat's out of the bag. We figured everybody's going to Little Rock Pond. The snow's melted. It's going to be a zoo. So we laid there in the van and we're chatting very quietly, wondering if somebody was in that car next to us. And I don't know, half hour, somewhere like that went by and we hadn't heard anything or seen anything. And then we're laying there trying to fall asleep. And all of a sudden I see a flashlight coming through the trees way up the road. And I said, "Hey, somebody's coming." So we made sure we hid our shoes and our purses and anything that might identify us as small women underneath blankets. And then we covered ourselves under the many down blankets and pillows that I had brought. We just we didn't really look like people under there, except it was very lumpy. We brought a lot of pillows. So we're under there, and shortly after I noticed the flashlight coming down, I'd say it was just a few minutes later, the person with the flashlight turned it off when they got a reflection from my van and they realized that they weren't the only car there. So that's kind of odd. If I was out hiking in the middle of the night and I was headed back to my car after a long late night hike, I wouldn't just shut my flashlight off about 5 minutes before I arrived to my destination. I would keep that on and maybe turn it off right before I got to my car if I was thinking about being courteous to people who might be sleeping in the vehicle near mine. Anyways, that was weird. So we go totally quiet and we hear the footsteps approach in total silence after several minutes of total darkness. And then we hear the footsteps circling my van. And this person circled my van several times. And after doing that a few times, they went really quiet for a while. And then all of a sudden, boom, a flashlight is on, shining it down into my van. Like they must have been right up against the glass. And then they slowly scan with the flashlight back and forth, up and down, really examining inside my van. And we're underneath the blankets, but we can see the light through my big white fluffy comforter. And, we're just totally quiet, totally still. We don't want anybody to know that we're in there because we're just freaked out. And we're also thinking like, what if this person found the treasure? They must be up here treasure hunting. Our minds didn't go anywhere dark at that point. We didn't think there might be a murderer up there with us. We're quiet, we're still. Then the person starts circling my van with the light, looking in every single window, and then they freeze in the rear window with the flashlight trained right on my head. So I'm laying there looking up at this thing. It's beaming right at my head. And I'm like, do I remove the covers? Do I say, hi, just humans, what are you doing? And I was like, no, this is such weird behavior. I'm going to stay quiet and I'm going to stay concealed. And that's what I did. And after several minutes of this light just being trained on my head, the person turns it off and I hear their footsteps go over to their vehicle and they get inside and proceed to turn it on and listen to music pretty loudly. What were they listening to? I don't know. I couldn't tell. It was just far enough away, but they were just blasting music in there. And I thought that was really odd too, because if I had gone for a really long late night hike all the way up an access road before I could even get to the trailhead, and then presumably, I thought he was a treasure hunter, he went up the trail, which is a couple miles as well. When I got back at like 2:30 a.m., I definitely would have gone to sleep. I wouldn't have blasted music for 35, 45 minutes, which is what this person did. And after said time, they shut off the music and quietly exited their vehicle. They like snuck out of it as best they could. And my sister started to sit up because she thought they had left. And I, as hushed, but as sternly as I possibly could, said, lay back down. He's still here. So she quickly lays back down, doesn't move. Boom. Flashlight is back on, looking in the van. And, we're just sweating bullets because we're nervous and we're just covered under, so much warmth. Anyways, really scary. One of those moments when you can like hear your heartbeat in your ears, like very scary. And the person continued to like circle the car several times, turn off the flashlight, turn it back on. They're just being really weird, just peeking in. And eventually they get back in their car and sit there for a while longer. And finally they pull out and leave. So it was several hours that we dealt with some super weirdo. And then, we couldn't sleep after that. We were all like fired up on adrenaline. And we got an early start and we went up to my spot and we didn't find anything. However, I will say that there was one area where my solve was in a rather swampy area, which is weird. You had to like go through a little swampy area to get to where my ex was. And when I got to that area, I was like, oh my God, there must be a bear here and it must be in its den because there is a foul odor right here. Like it was gross smelling. And I was like, dude, Ann, you know what? Never mind. Let's get out of here. It's not here. We wound up hiking 22 miles in the morning and then even more later that day. We went all over that place. And it was awesome. And I didn't think much about it after that. However, when my sister and I would talk about the event, we would refer to it as the murderer. And it was like this little joke we had. Remember the time we went hiking looking for JCB's Appalachian Footpath box and we encountered the murderer? All right, fast forward to the end of May, early June of this year, 2026. And there's a report in the paper that human remains had been found up in that area. wearing hiking boots and just bones sticking out of the boots. So now my sister and I are sending each other stories about this back and forth because we're like, holy shit, that's where we were looking. And could it be? Did we almost wind up like that poor person did? So crazy. So I have a new theory now, and it's dark. Maybe two people went up, and one person found the box, and the other person didn't want to share. Is it possible that the AT box is no longer where JCB had hid it, but the person who has it can't come forward and say so because they'd be outing themselves as the killer? Anyways, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Has anything like this ever happened to you while you were out treasure hunting or just hiking? Have you ever gone night hiking in the spring? Are out-of-state people always weird like that? Just kidding. Anyways, yeah, it was just really weird, and I can't help but think that something terrible happened that night, just based off of the gut feeling that hit my sister and I at pretty much the exact same moment when we went out to find the Appalachian Footpath box. Do you think the Appalachian Footpath box has been found? Do you think there's any possible truth behind my experience there? And have you ever encountered anybody that really creeped you out while you were out treasure hunting? With no disrespect to the person whose remains were found up there, not towards them or their family. May they rest in peace, and I'm very sorry for your loss. But if there was foul play, I hope that my story can help bring closure, which is a big part of why I reported it to the Vermont State Police. I'm going to show you what I've been working on. It's a dry point etching of a fierce treasure hunter.